welcome to my AuthorTube channel. My name is Bobbi Holmes. I am the USA Today Bestselling Author of the Haunting Danielle series, which is a paranormal cozy mystery series. And I also write under the pen name Anna J. McIntyre. First, I'd like to apologize for the audio quality. The microphone that I purchased, it was not working, and since we are at shelter in place, I can't really run out and get one. I can order one on Amazon, but that's going to take me a few days before I get it. So I will soldier through with this microphone. And another apology, my voice is squeakier than normal. Allergies are kind of kicking my butt, and so I'm coughing and allergies, and hopefully I'll get through this video without being too annoying. So what I want to discuss today is author income, specifically self-publishing income. Not too long ago, I watched a gentleman's video on YouTube. He has a very large platform, and he told his viewers, do not self-publish. If you write a book, don't do it. If you do it, you're not going to make any money. He went on and on and on in this video why not to self-publish. Now, he is a gentleman that has a pretty large YouTube following. And at the end of his video, he told his viewers that he intended to self-publish, but he had a large platform, so that meant that he would probably be successful at it. And it really bothered me. He also said that self-publishing, what he didn't like was that self-publishing was setting people up for disappointment. Well, you know, I really had a problem with that, because I guess you can say that about anything you want to try. Don't try it because you'll be disappointed if you don't make it. Okay, but he's not the only one that talks that way. I went online and I've watched lots of YouTube videos and AuthorTube, and it's a pretty common belief that self-published authors really don't make that much money. Okay, some of the beliefs are, okay, I've heard this on YouTube. If you hear an author saying, I make money, they're probably lying. That's one thing that is said out there. Another belief is that the people that are making money, that they are advertising a fortune, and so whatever they're making is really sort of skewed because the advertising takes up all their profits. Well, in some instances that's true. I know there are some authors out there that make maybe double what I do, but once they pay their advertising, they end up making less than I do. However, that's not always the case. For example, I have one friend who he spends about $260,000 a year on his advertising. Well, that's a heck of a lot of money. But then again, his book sales are over 900,000. So even after spending that much money, he still makes over $600,000 a year. So that's pretty darn good. Another belief is that self-published authors, or at least those who profess to be supporting themselves, actually have a significant other who supports them and enables them to write full time. Well, that might be the case sometimes, but it's not always the case. I know a lot of authors that are the primary breadwinners in their family. And another opinion that I found on there was that most self-published authors have other sources of income. Now that actually, there's a lot of truth to that. Especially when you first start out in the business, you need to find other ways to support yourself as you build your business. And some author platforms rely on other sources of income. For instance, your books might be part of it, but you might also do speaking engagements, you might have a profitable YouTube channel, or you might have products that you sell. There's all kinds of different ways that people make money. And the thing is, self-publishing is a business, and so everybody's business model is a little different. For me, my primary income comes from my book sales. For somebody else, it may come from something else. It's not only the YouTubers and the different blogs that talk about how you don't make that much money from self-publishing. A while back, probably last year, there was a very dismal report on self-publishing and publishing in general. And it talked about how authors really don't make that much money. In fact, I believe they said that self-published authors made less than $500 a year or something like that. Well, but then I read more, and another article pointed out that if you took out all of those people that claim to be self-publishers but made nothing, took them out of the equation altogether, and just looked at the people that made something, 3 out of 7 of those self-published authors were bringing in an income of $50,000 or more a year. So that tells a totally different story. And actually it's a story that resonates with me because I have a lot of author friends who make a good living doing this. And then there's something else that I often hear people say about self-publishing. They say if you're going to self-publish, you have to treat it like a business. You're going to be wearing 2 hats, that of the publisher and that of the writer. And that is true. However, these same people often tell the writer, if you're going to self-publish, do it because you want to. Don't do it to make money. Don't expect to make money, which I find a very strange thing to tell somebody who's planning to, in essence, start a business. For example, if you have a friend that comes to you and says, I'm going to open a restaurant, are you going to tell that friend, well, go for it if it's something you really want to do, but if you're going to open that restaurant, don't do it to make money, just do it because it's something you want to do? Well, that's kind of crazy advice. You wouldn't say that. But the fact is, businesses are very risky. Self-publishing businesses, restaurant businesses, businesses in general. And so when you do start your publishing business, you realize that there is no guarantee that you're going to make it, but it's the same for any business out there. According to many of the articles I've read, 20% of all businesses go out within a year. 50% go out at the 5-year mark, and by the 10-year mark, 70% of those businesses are out of business. And so, like any other business, self-publishing is a risky endeavor. There's no guarantee, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. So when I was thinking about this, I started wondering, especially after I'm watching YouTube channel after YouTube channel or reading different blogs saying you can't make any money at this, I started wondering, am I the unicorn out there? I mean, I never really thought of myself as that because I have some author friends who make more money than I do, considerable more. But according to everything I read, what I'm doing is such a rarity. So I went to one of my author groups and I started talking to them about it. And one of my friends, this is what she said to me. She said since 2014, she has made $140,000 to $165,000 each year. She said, Bobbi, I can tell you, you're not a unicorn. And she knows a ton of self-published authors in her genre, she is in the fantasy genre, who make better money than she does. And according to her, romance authors are kicking it. So that was her perspective, which was similar to mine. So I thought, first I'm going to share what I do in self-publishing to give you my perspective, and then I have a couple of author friends who told me I could share with you what they do. So you can kind of see what different people around that I know are doing in self-publishing. Okay, in 2009, I was a freelance writer. Now, several years before that, I had written a cookbook, and it was for my family. I published it at Lulu, and I had books printed out, and it was never done for a commercial venture, and I gave the books away at Christmas time. So in 2009, while I'm being a freelance writer, I heard about the KDP platform where authors could upload their books and then sell them as ebooks on Amazon. They were fairly new, they'd only been around a couple of years. So I thought, well, I'm going to give it a shot. So I uploaded my file. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't know how to format a book for an ebook platform. And I put my book up there. Now, that was in 2009. So my recipe book stayed up on the platform for 3 years. And in that time, I made a little over $13 total. So I think that is sort of an example of what some publishers out there have done. And I'm wondering often, are those the publishers that are in the equation when they're talking about publisher income? Now for me, I didn't stay there. I decided to give it another shot when in 2012, a few years later, I was getting really burned out with my freelancing, and I thought, well, I'm going to load a book of fiction I had a romance novel I had written several years before. And I decided that I would give it a shot on the Amazon platform and some of the other platforms that were around back then that had come up, like for instance Smashwords, which is still around. So I hired an editor I had met at my freelancing job to edit my manuscript. And I had my daughter create me a book cover because she was a professional graphic artist. In fact, today that's what she does, is book covers. And I uploaded the book in 2011. That's actually when I did it, was in 2011. But in 2012, I kept writing books. I didn't just stop with the one book. I kept writing one book after another. And at the end of 2012, my income in book sales on all the different platforms was a little under $33,000 that year. Now, one reason I did that well actually was because the time that was during the gold rush of the self-publishing through the ebook platform. It was all relatively new. Readers were looking for books and there weren't as many books up as there are now, so I did pretty good that year. But in 2013, my income slid and I made a little over $19,000 the following year, which again is not unusual because during that time, sales often would fluctuate for people. They do really well and then they wouldn't, because we were all trying to figure out what we were doing. Well, the next year in 2014, I started my Haunting Danielle series. And at the end of 2014, my income went up to over $35,000 that year. So I recouped, went back to what I was the couple years prior and a little bit more. And I kept working consistently on my Haunting Danielle. Now, during the 2 years prior that I had started, 2 or 3 years before that, I was watching what everybody was doing. I was learning. I was finding out what worked for me, what worked in the industry, how to sell books, what kind of things you needed to do. And the following year, in 2015, my income doubled. And in 2016, my income doubled again. In 2017, my income went up, didn't double, but it went up, and the following year went up a heck of a lot the next year, and it's stayed up since then. So my point being that, you know, for me, I kind of like the two stories of the self-published author. There was the me that threw up that cookbook and then didn't really do anything, and had that been the only book, I might have gone around and said, self-publishing really doesn't work. But then later I came back to it and I approached it as a business and I worked very hard. I constantly wrote, and so it wasn't something I just did in a lark or that I just spent a little time. I treated it like a full-time business, which self-publishing is a full-time business. So now I would like to share some of the stories of my friends. My first friend I want to introduce you to is Nick Russell. I met Nick back when I first started self-publishing at Amazon, not with the cookbook, the other time. Nick and his wife Terry at that time were full-time RVers. They had taken to the road and were traveling all around the country and making a living out of it. He was publishing a magazine called Gypsy Journal that was for RVers. But prior to that time, Nick had owned a string of newspaper in Oregon. And for about 6 years, he was also a special investigator for the Attorney General's office. And he came from a law enforcement family. So it's not really a big surprise that Nick, when he decided to try writing fiction, that he would go into mysteries and crime. But in 2011, he decided to write his first book of fiction, and it was called Big Lakes. And he put it up on Amazon. Now, Nick was sort of like that guy that had the blog that talked about you only can make it with the platform. Well, he had a big platform. He had his Gypsy Journal he was already publishing. He had a blog he put out. He had a newsletter. So he had a lot of people that were following him. So when he put out his first mystery novel, all these people were buying it. And especially because Nick decided to price his novel at 99 cents, which was kind of the thing back then to do. Well, what happened was Nick made the New York Times bestseller list. Now that's a little difficult to do now for self-published authors because the New York Times has since changed some of their lists, and now from what I understand it kind of requires you have to sell so many paperbacks also to be in most of the lists, whereas a self-published author tends to be heavier on, ebooks and audiobooks than paper. But for Nick, he made the list back then. There were several publishers that came to Nick and wanted to buy his books, but he is sort of like me, that he likes to do his own thing, and he politely said no thanks, and he kept writing. And he ended up writing, he has about 26 books now. He has 17 books in his Big Lake series. He has 2 books in his Dog Run series, and he has 6 books with one coming out soon in his John Lee Quarles series. And he also has a standalone book of fiction, Black Friday. Unlike some other authors, he doesn't spend really any money at all on advertising, because he does have that large platform where he sends out, his newsletters and his blog posts, and so that's kind of his advertising. He doesn't do a lot of paid advertising. So in 2019, Nick made right around $120,000 for the year. So, the next author I'm going to introduce you to is Daphne Loving. She has 20 full-length novels and 3 novelettes. She started writing full-time in 2016, but she actually started part-time about 3 years before that. Her book sales for 2019 were $154,000 for the year. Now, she does advertise heavily. She spent about $25,000 in her ads that year, but still, she made, a lot of money. I mean, if you take 154 and you take out the 25, that's still a very good income. Another author I would like to introduce you to is J. Clifton Slater. He has 19 full-length novels. The breakdown is he has a historical fiction, science fiction, space opera, and epic fantasy. So you can see he writes over multiple genres. And sometimes that can adversely impact an author's income when they have quite a few genres, because what happens if you have a lot of readers that maybe they'll read one genre that you write, but they're not really crazy about the other genre. But if you build up a reader base and you write just one genre, then typically they're going to blow through all of your books. That's usually how it works. But in spite of that, he still made over $47,000 last year, and his advertising budget was around a little over $5,000. Another issue with last year for him is he did have some medical problems, so he couldn't work all year long. So in spite of that, he still made a nice income for a self-published author, a lot more than what everybody's saying people were making back then. So those are just kind of a sampling. I have a lot of friends I know that are making a lot of money, a lot more money. I have several author friends that are making like over $900,000 a year. Some are hybrid authors where there's some trade and there's some self-published. And the one thing that I keep finding from my author friends that are hybrid authors, especially ones that had trade deals with the big trades, they kind of prefer self-publishing. They say in the long run they feel they can make more with self-publishing. Before you self-publish, you really do need to ask yourself, okay, do I want to do this as a business, or do I have another motivation for self-publishing? And actually some people can have different motivations for self-publishing. For example, let's say you are like I was back then and wrote a cookbook. And your primary reason for writing the cookbook, like mine, was for your family. But you kind of like the idea of putting it up on Amazon and then thinking that someday one of your great-grandkids, if Amazon's still around then, might find your cookbook online. You kind of live on it. It's kind of a cool thing to think about. Well, if that's the case, if that is your goal to publish for something like that, then you don't really, even though they say treat it like a business, you don't really have to treat it like a business in that instance. Yes, you probably want to do the best you can, just so when your great-grandchild looks up the book, it has a nice cover and it's been edited properly. But that's not the same as devoting this all the time to create a business plan in order to make a living. So those are two different things. So you need to ask yourself, why do I want to self-publish? And if you don't want to, if you want to keep writing, but you don't see yourself as having 2 or 3 books in yourself a year, maybe once a year, every couple of years, but you want to be a writer, then maybe trade is the avenue you need to pursue. If you're the person that has more than a couple books in you in a year, and you want to write what you want to write, and you feel like you're an entrepreneur, then maybe self-publishing is something you should really seriously look at. And you have to remember too, one book does not necessarily make a publishing business. Now it can. For instance, let's go back to that cookbook person. Okay, let's say you wrote a cookbook, but it's not for a family. You want to get rich on it. You want to really make a lot of money as a cookbook. Well, chances are you publish your book, your cookbook, no matter how much you advertise, you're not going to do that great on it unless you create your platform. And you might then have your great cookbook up there, but then maybe start a YouTube channel that really catches on. Maybe you give talks, maybe you, whatever. Maybe you have products that you sell. And so you build a business around your ebook, but that is not the primary source of the business because each business has products. Your book in that sense is just one product. And that's another thing to remember when you start a self-publishing business. Your books are a product. Now, some businesses cannot sustain with just one product or two products or even three. So sometimes it might take 4 or 5 or even more books before you really start making a sustainable income, which is one reason a lot of self-published authors do other things in order to support themselves, like Patreon or YouTube channels where they monetize, different things like that. There's all types of things you can do, but each one is a very personal decision and not right for everybody. It's not one size fits all by any means. Before I wrap up, I'd like to go over a few points. The first one, when somebody talks about the income level of a self-published author, one problem is when they're talking about that, they're not clearly defining what they mean by a self-published author. Two different people can be discussing the income level of a self-published author, and for each of those people, they are meaning an entirely different thing when they're thinking about what is a self-published author. So that is something just to remember. Another thing, there is no guarantee that you're going to make it as a self-published author. However, there's no guarantee you won't make it. The only guarantee out there is no one will make any money self-publishing when they don't do it. That's the only guarantee. Another thing to remember, typically one book or two books isn't enough to sustain a business for a self-publisher. Usually it's going to require more books. I have most of my author friends write 3, 4 more books a year in order to sustain their business. Of course, there's always the exception to the rule, and some people write fewer books, but then they have a business where they rely on other things like a YouTube channel that they monetize, or they do speaking engagements, or they teach classes. So each business is different. You have to find out what works for you. And then remember, businesses in general are risky. I mean, that's just how it is. No business is a guarantee. Self-publishing is no different. And with self-publishing, it's just like opening any business. You have to figure out what's going to work best with your product, because each author out there has their own unique product. And they have to figure out how to find the customers for their product and how best to do that. Personally, I believe self-publishing it's more possible to make a sustainable income self-publishing as opposed to trade publishing. For one thing, you're in more control of what you're doing as opposed to trade publishing, where you're pretty much an employee in the sense that the trade publisher will tell you how much to write or even what you can write. And they have so much control over the situation, whereas if an entrepreneur who's a savvy entrepreneur and has a good product, they can propel their books in different ways that a trade publisher can't. And the one reason I wanted to do this video, back in 2011 when I first got into self-publishing, I read a blog post by Jay Conrath. He's still a writer today, and he was one of the early voices promoting self-publishing. And I remember he was going to make something like $100,000 that year, and I was like, wow. I just thought that was so amazing. Now, when I read his blog, it didn't tell me, you, Bobbi, are going to make $100,000 in self-publishing. It didn't tell me that. But what it did tell me that there was a possibility of doing that. And it was great encouragement to me, because I realized that if he did it, then maybe if I worked hard and I had some good books, maybe I could do it too. And so that was a really encouragement to me. And a lot of my author friends that have become successful, they have been encouragement to me and helped me along the way. So that's the reason I wanted to do this video today. Like I say, there's no guarantee you're going to make anything, but you never know until you try. So I'm going to sign off now. Bye, and I hope the next time I'm here, my voice is better, my audio is better on the video. We'll see. Bye.